Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. I'm still on my Distress Oxide kick, and I'm going to use another one of my color combinations from last week's video, this time Tattered Rose, Abandoned Coral, and Seedless Preserves, and I'm going to use the Butterfly Mandala stamp set from WPlus9. Really like this really big, kind of lacy, intricate mandala design. I thought it'd be really pretty. Starting out with some hot press watercolor paper from Fabriano. This is their hot press paper. That means it's very smooth and it doesn't have quite as much texture as regular cold press watercolor paper. And I'm using hot press paper because it's smooth. I'm going to do some heat embossing on top. And I thought the heat embossing would just look a little bit better on smoother cardstock or smoother watercolor paper. So I'm taking my Distress Oxide colors and I'm smushing them down onto a slick surface. This is a Tonic Easy Clean Matte, and I'm kind of moving those around. And if you try this at home and you get some of the other colors on your ink pad, it's not a big deal. You can use a paper towel and just dab your ink pad and it'll pick up that color. Sprayed it with a water bottle. This is the Distress sprayer from Holtz. And then I smushed my watercolor paper right down onto all of this ink. And when I pick it up, it has the most beautiful, ethereal kind of look to it. And there's a part of me that kind of wishes I would have just kept it like this, but I didn't. I kept going and I added more and more color. And I'm going to work in layers. I've done this ink smushing technique with watercolor, kind of a watercolor ink smushing technique, many times in the past, not recently. So if you are a recent viewer to my videos, you may have not seen this technique. You work in layers, and so I have the first layer done. I'm going to dry it with my heat tool, or you can let it air dry. And then I'm going to pounce the watercolor paper back into all these droplets of ink, just the leftover ink. And it's going to add more color in certain areas and kind of harsh water edges on some. It's just a way to add a lot of interest. So as I add more and more of this ink color on top as my second layer, I lose some of that look that I had with my very first go. But I do enjoy how it turned out. I kind of like both ways. So after I've pounced this in the splotches of leftover ink for a little bit, I'm going to kind of dab off the drips using a paper towel, and then I'll hit that with my heat tool once again so that I can do a third layer of color. So I'm going to use my heat tool and dry this as much as I can. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm actually going to add a little bit more Seedless Preserves. I wanted that darker, more intense color. So just smush that down. I'm going to spray it with my Distress sprayer one more time. And then I can go ahead and pounce my watercolor paper back into those areas. Just going to give me some more intense areas. And it's also an opportunity to add kind of like splotches of color. I'm not sure what to call them. It gives it a really cool texture. So I'm going to smush that down a few more times, and then I'll hit that with my heat tool until it's dry. So I'm going to do one more additional step to this, and that is by adding clean water on top. Before I get to that, I'm going to show you how the color combo looks next to that blended piece. So I sprayed my hand with water, and then I'm flicking the water onto my watercolor piece. And then I'm going to take a paper towel, and it's going to pick up that color, the water, and picks up the water with a little bit of color, leaves behind kind of just some water droplets. Now this effect on Distress Oxide ink is a little bit more subtle compared to using the original Distress ink, but it did add some texture that I really liked. So now I'm going to take that really large Butterfly Mandala stamp, and I'm going to stamp this in Versamark ink onto my watercolor panel. And I'm going to do some heat embossing. So that's why I'm using Versamark ink, and I'm going to have it be a metallic embossing powder because this really lacy design, I thought it would just look really elegant and pretty with a silver metallic shade to it. So I'm going to take some, let's see, this is called Sterling embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and I'm going to sprinkle it over the top of this entire stamped image until all of it is completely coated. And once I have it all coated, I can shake off the excess, tap it with my fingers, make sure there's none kind of hanging out in areas where I don't want it. And then I can use my heat tool to melt it. And it's going to melt it down to a beautiful, shiny silver line. And I'm actually going to set the watercolor piece aside because I'm not going to use it for a bit. But I did want to show you that as I was cooling it with my, after the heat embossing, I did bend it back and I kind of got rid of some of that warping. So now I'm taking the Seedless Preserves ink and I'm stamping the greeting from the stamp set. I thought I would use the greeting like this. I ended up doing something different, but I did want to show you that there is this option with this stamp set to stamp the outline of the hello word, and then you can stamp the interior solid areas of those letters. So I'm using Abandoned Coral, and I'm going to stamp that right over the top. This is one of those stamping opportunities with Distress Oxide inks that you can't do as well with the original Distress inks. Oxide inks can stamp really, really solidly. They're great for stamping, whereas original Distress inks, you can stamp with them, but it doesn't give you the best results. So I tend to not do that. I'm taking that Seedless Preserves and I'm going directly to my paper so I can kind of get a cardstock color that is that color. And then once that was dry, I stamped the I Miss You greeting from the stamp set, and I'm stamping that in Versamark ink so that I can do some heat embossing on this part as well. So I'm going to use that same silver embossing powder, the sterling color from Brutus Monroe. And then when I hit it with my heat tool, it just comes to life. You can see it just brightens up and it's so easy to read on this dark Seedless Preserves background. So like I said before, I ended up not using that hello that I stamped earlier. Instead, I decided that I wanted to have some more silver on the words and that I would put it on some vellum. So I'm stamping the hello outline in Versamark ink on top of vellum that has been prepped with an anti-static powder tool. I'm going to press that down really gently because I want it to keep a very nice thin line weight. Then I sprinkled on that silver embossing powder. So I'm going to hit this with my heat tool until it's smooth and melted. You can see how quickly that melts on top of this vellum. And then I took a Copic marker. This is the RV19 shade, and I've turned my vellum piece over and I'm coloring on the back. That's because when you use colored embossing powder, including metallic embossing powders like this, it can be eaten away by the alcohol ink of the marker and it can ruin the tips of your markers. So that's why I'm coloring on the back, and also because it's more forgiving. It's that embossing powder on the front is going to hide any jagged lines from my coloring. I trimmed down the watercolor panel so that it is 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. So it's the finished card size. And then I took my vellum piece. Just kidding, I'm going to prep the card base first. This is some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and I scored that at 5 1/2 to create a top folding card. And now I'm wrapping that vellum piece around the watercolor piece, and I'm folding it around the edges and then taping it down using some Tombow Extreme adhesive. Put a little bit of foam tape behind that I Miss You greeting. Just trim that down to a really small area. And then I put that down on top of the vellum. The last thing to do is to add lots of foam tape on the back of my watercolor panel and then place it over top of that card base. So this finishes the card for today. Hope that gives you some ideas or additional ideas of things you can do with your Distress Oxide inks. I think watercolor backgrounds like this look gorgeous and they look so fun. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I will be back tomorrow with the second in my video series on Distress Oxides.